Very welcome here this afternoon for the formal launch of the report of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Climate Action. I believe that this report marks a new era for climate policy in Ireland. We know the science around climate change is becoming increasingly more urgent. The IPCC's special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius was the starkest warning yet that we are running out of time to address runaway climate change. In Ireland, in recent times, we're beginning to see some of the initial effects of climate change through extreme weather, such as flooding and heat waves affecting our homes, our farms and our businesses. Our citizens, and in particular our young people, are mobilising to demand stronger climate action to secure their futures. Our Citizens' Assembly were clear in their call for Ireland to do more in addressing this existential threat. And in establishing the Joint Committee to look at the recommendations of the Citizens' Assembly and in producing this detailed report for action, the Oireachtas shows that we are listening to Irish citizens, demonstrating that we take climate change extremely seriously and underlining that we must take strong and immediate action to address it. I'd like to take this opportunity to recognise the work that this committee has done over the last 7 months. I'd like to commend my colleagues on the committee across all political groupings for their commitment to this process. Our political parties should be proud at reaching a strong consensus position on many of the tough actions that government must take for Ireland to play its part in fairly addressing climate change globally. This report provides a clear mandate on actions the government must take to address Ireland's international climate commitments. It is a large and particularly detailed Oireachtas report containing more than 40 priority recommendations for government and state agencies. It addresses actions across all sectors and proposes a new governance framework for climate policy that will pave the way for more transformational changes in individual sectors. It also covers cross-cutting themes such as incentivising climate action, just transition, citizen engagement and education and communication. The report further highlights the opportunity for Ireland to gain competitive advantage by developing new business models and entering into new markets and exploit new opportunities as we transition to a low-carbon economy. In our work, we've tried to make the report accessible to citizens, highlighting the opportunities and co-benefits from lower carbon living, such as cleaner air, shorter commuting times and healthier homes. We've tried to work with all sectors, making recommendations that incentivise and drive the transition to a low-carbon economy. It is up to government now to use this bold political mandate in developing its all-of-government action plan to feed into Ireland's national energy and climate plan. It has been a privilege to chair this committee, supporting Ireland to meet its international climate obligations and hopefully, ultimately, to become a global leader in climate action. This report represents significant political consensus that will help to frame climate policy in Ireland for the next 15 years. It is my earnest hope that the recommendations in this report are implemented as quickly as possible, particularly around the establishment of a new and comprehensive framework for climate policy in Ireland. Let this be the beginning of the ambitious and immediate actions government must take to get Ireland back on track and keep us on track in meeting our international climate change obligations. Thank you. So what we might do is, if members have, or if you in the audience have any questions you might want to put, and I'll let my colleagues here, and I know some of my colleagues are in the audience as well, to address some of the questions. So if you might, when you're speaking, you might just stand up and state your name, and we'll take questions. So anyone want to, or any comments? I know many of you here in the room have actually fed into our hearings over the last few months, and I want to thank you all for your input. It's been invaluable to us. And important that we've had that expertise and I suppose listening to the different sectors in relation to your concerns coming before us, because that has really greatly informed our work as a committee. I might let in Deputy Seán Sherlock, who wants to just contribute first.
Thank you, Chair. Just while people are thinking about questions and maybe interacting, just for my own part as the Labour representative, my name is Seán Sherlock. I just want to thank the Chair and the Secretariat just on a personal basis, and the advisors on a personal basis for the work that they did, because I think, again, speaking personally, I don't think that I would have been able to have engaged as much with this committee had it not been for the advice and the work of the Secretariat, because I think that they did a marvellous job in educating me anyway, certainly in some of the elements of the challenges that exist, and I think without their work I certainly feel that this report wouldn't be the report that it is today, giving rise to the recommendations therein. And just on a political point, if I could make this, is that we now have, by the end of 2019, to come up with a National Energy and Climate Plan. And I would hope now that the government of the day would take seriously the recommendations that are in this plan, such that they are inculcated into that plan and that they give rise to very specific actions. Because, there are radical proposals within the plan or within the recommendations, and if we don't, from a political point of view, reflect those recommendations and work those into a specific set of actions, then I think we're going to fall further behind in relation to reaching targets. So just on a very general point, I would be hopeful that as one member of this committee, that this committee's work would be influential in influencing the government's own National Energy and Climate Plan, and that that there is a massive urgency around this agenda, and that we would move to work together collaboratively in a non-partisan basis to try and ensure that plan reflects the work of this committee.
Thank you, Deputy. And Deputy Timmy Dooley.
Thanks very much, Chair. Timmy Dooley is my name. I'm the Fianna Fáil Party spokesperson on the Environment and Climate Action. And like others, I want to join with the committee in thanking Ted McHenry as clerk to the committee in particular for the tremendous work that he and his team did, and the forbearance and the patience that he had in abundance for all of us as things got a little tetchy in trying to reach a consensus, which is never easy in politics. Even when parties are cooperating or facilitating, it's not necessarily always the case that we'll agree on everything, and even where we find a consensus, then the how you do it can often be somewhat problematic. But I think we have a comprehensive blueprint here that, if it's followed by this and future governments, we have a chance, and it's only a chance, to avert change. If those of us here, or those of us that will be here for future Dáils, just sit back and believe that because this report is completed, that our work is done, well then we won't have achieved anything. There are notable people in this room today who have been around for the drafting of many reports, and they have seen reports that predate my birth, still sitting on shelves, gathering dust, that at the time were heralded as the beginning of something great, of which there would be a wonderful future, and that wonderful dawn has never come. So it's about action now, and for me it's about moving beyond academics and environmentalists who have played such an important role in getting this issue on the mainstream agenda, performed so well and contributed so importantly to our deliberations. But you'll continue to do your work. The question is, will we, and will society? There's a lot of direction here for the government and actions that the government has to take, and it's for all of us to make sure that that happens in a bipartisan way. But the debate, as I said, needs to move from the abstract world of academia and environmentalist from an expert point of view into the day-to-day lives of people. People have to see a benefit, and they've got to be encouraged to make that behavioural change in how they live their lives. Government can show leadership, but it cannot be just based on a stick approach. it has to be based on a carrot and stick approach. People have to see the benefit to them in terms of changing their behaviour. It has to be economically viable for them, and the incentives will have to be front-loaded. People will have to be encouraged at an early stage. We cannot wait. We cannot allow time to pass. We know that. The Chairperson and others have set out very fundamentally the window in which we can act. But we need, it's not just about a small number of actors. Everybody needs to change. And that has to come from the direction and the leadership of government, and government policy will have to provide that carrot, if you want. The stick is there in terms of other aspects, but we really need now to I think, focus on the job at hand and move it now out of the Oireachtas and out into the mainstream dialogue with the citizens of this state.
Thank you, Deputy. Daniel.
Daniel Collins from the Examiner. Timmy, you referred to, I suppose, the tension amongst the committee members in relation to some of the deliberations. Obviously, we are aware that there were tensions around the issue of the carbon tax. You set out, I suppose, a roadmap to €80 per tonne by 2030, but ultimately, does that not represent essentially a glorified fudge, that parochial parish pump politics has trumped what is probably best for the economy and the environment?
Well, thanks, Danny. Thanks for the question. We followed the decision of the committee, or the majority of the committee, was based on the Climate Advisory's direction there, which they had sought, and that discussion took place in the Citizens' Assembly. So our debate didn't take place in isolation. The Citizens' Assembly discussed, based on recommendations from the Climate Advisory Committee. Professor Fitzgerald, who's with us, had provided evidence that the best way to address a behavioural change was to set out a clear trajectory over time, with an escalator in there to increase the price of carbon. It should have been done sooner. Don't forget, Fianna Fáil introduced the charging of carbon together with the Greens when we were last in government, and had the previous governments continued that trajectory, I think we'd be in a better place now. That didn't happen, but the view was taken that you don't want to create a shock, that you do it on a gradual basis to give certainty to citizens and business that, as you plan your investment cycle over the coming years, you will know that you've got to factor in an increase in the price of carbon.
So you're not,
and therefore, sorry?
The commission was novel essentially by business interests. It's not ambitious enough.
Not at all. We follow the advice of the advisory committee, who had taken all that into account to give certainty to business in terms of changing their behaviour, and you do it over time, and that was the way to do it. The issue that you talk about in terms of the issues between parties was really about ensuring that the necessary safeguards are there, from our perspective anyway, to ensure that people on low incomes and vulnerable to fuel poverty had the necessary state supports put in place before you introduce a taxation, an escalation in the taxation. And I think that's universally agreed across all parties, the importance to ensure that you don't leave people behind who are not in a position to invest heavily in retrofitting their homes, deep retrofitting their homes, or putting in place the kind of insulation, or changing away from coal to electricity, or from fossil fuels to more expensive forms of heat, without the necessary financial support or packages to do that. And we were very strong, and there was consensus reached on that to ensure that people weren't left behind, or weren't people who couldn't afford to make the change, that they weren't left in fuel poverty, or left effectively without heat.
Thank you. And I think the whole issue of fairness was a key concern for all members within this committee in relation to a price of carbon, and that's why we've included in this report, you'll see a review of fuel poverty, as well as the department, to be done in conjunction in relation, as the Department of Finance also is to engage in a short, sharp engagement process with citizens and key sectors who would have genuine concerns in relation to a price in carbon and how that would affect the different sectors. So that has been the key concern, and it's important to reiterate that a price in carbon was one small part of our overall deliberations. We met for 7 months, and it was only, I'd say 99% of the time was every other aspect, and you can see it in the depth of this book here in our report about fairness and how we would, we have a number of over 40 key recommendations across the key sectors, and a price in carbon is just one part of that, and I suppose encouraging people to make that transition and allowing them to do it in a fair way, and protecting those who are facing fuel poverty was a key concern of all members of this committee, and I think it's important to reiterate that. And I'm going to give all the panel a chance to come in, but I just want to go to numbers who have indicated. We've the IFA here as well. If you just stand up and just introduce yourself.
Thomas Cooney, IFA Environment Chairman. I suppose we want to first of all broadly welcome the measures that's in this for agriculture. Last November we wrote to the Taoiseach and we met all the political parties. We stated that the Teagasc climate roadmap had the potential to reduce agricultural emissions by up to a third whilst maintaining production. We welcome that this has been taken on board, and I see it is in the plan, and it's going to be included, or is suggested to be included in the next CAP. There will be an extra environmental ask on the next CAP. In order for that to be delivered sufficiently, we will need an increased budget, an increased CAP budget. Does the committee support the government to increase government support for the contribution to the next CAP budget post-2020?
Thank you. Thank you. Do you want to come in on that, Senator Lombard?
I'll take that and look at a welcome contribution by IFA and all farming organisations when it came to this report. We realised that agriculture was going to be an important sector, and how we dealt with that issue was going to be a very, very sensitive issue. I think agriculture is a part of the solution. It's not really a part of the problem, and I think we've highlighted many key aspects in this report, such as anaerobic digestion, transfer knowledge. They're key issues that we need to actually promote in this report and in the actual agricultural industry, so they can be a part of the solution. The Teagasc report of last year was key. 27 recommendations brought forward very practical issues, whether it was basically milk recording, fertiliser spreading, digestion. All these issues were all looked at. They're key to the actual report itself and key to actually reducing our carbon footprint on the farms. But the actual CAP and the CAP negotiations are very important. What's proposed in the CAP negotiations, that 40% of single farm payments will be for environmental issues, and I think that's a major change in policy. I think it's an important step and an important way that we're changing how we're going to farm. I think we've always said that there should be no cut in the actual CAP budget itself. There is at the moment a proposed cut. That is an issue that we are totally against as a committee, and I speak on the agricultural committee as well. We believe that budget cannot be cut. We believe if we are to be sustainable going forward, we need to have that payment, in particularly now with the new emphasis on actual environment. So the farming community have, I think, your organisation and many organisations have welcomed this report. It is a roadmap. It's a roadmap to reducing emissions and making sure that agriculture and the rural economy is very viable.
Thank you. And Senator Grace O'Sullivan and Senator Paul Daly want to come in on this issue as well. So.
Just in relation to the report, I think it's important to say we started from a very low baseline, and there's no doubt about that. And the report is only part of a process, but we're still, underway. The big thing for me was the education that was. That we received in the course of the several months and going on the back of the recommendations from the Citizens' Assembly. So it was almost like an education process for the TD senators and I believe for all members of the Oireachtas in the past 7 months. So that was a good start. It's just the start of the process. But with regard to what you say, Thomas, your question, agriculture, of course, plays a huge role in Ireland in terms of our society and economies, and and also in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. For the Green Party, it's absolutely essential that farming communities are supported, but particularly the ones that feel that they are being disadvantaged in the current farming and agricultural model in this country. So that I'm talking about are the farm families. So we would like to see the cap at least maintained or increased for farmers, because there's so many opportunities for us as this country. So it's critical that you are not disadvantaged at this junction, given that agriculture has such a huge role to play in terms of climate and greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you. Senator Paul Daly.
Thanks, Chair. Just in response to Thomas, I would have come to the table very cognizant of the fact that there's a lot of movement out there that if Irish agriculture was to cut back production, it would help this problem. But it is a known and proven fact that world food production will have to increase by 50% to meet the rising population growth in the interim period. So like just cutting back and leading to what we call carbon leakage. We are efficient in our production, and I was cognizant of that, but we can become far more efficient. I suppose it's the incorporation of technologies and science, and the farmers that are out there at the moment are the custodians of the environment. So I suppose it's the maintenance of the forestry and the hedgerows as part of the process going forward. But we're all aware, with Brexit aside, of the hardship the farmers are suffering at the moment with prices. And no matter than any other sphere, if they're not rewarded, if they don't have the disposable cash to spend on the technologies and on the sciences and on the improvements they need to make, it won't happen. It should be put on the long finger because the money is not there. So it's vitally important that through cap and indeed fairer prices for a greener produced projects, that they are rewarded and do have that disposable cash to invest. If that's not there, it won't happen.
Thank you. Deputy Sherlock,
I suppose as a Labour representative coming from a strong agricultural constituency, but as a Labour representative who, ordinarily we wouldn't be associated with the agricultural sector, it's probably perhaps no harm for you to hear from people such as myself, and to say that there was a very strong emphasis within the committee on the idea of diversification, diversifying into more into the horticultural sector and recognising the opportunities that exist there, but also doing so in a way that doesn't force people to stop production overnight. In other words, that you needed. This one thing we were very strong on was the idea of this just transition. Even though we spoke very strongly about the just transition in the Midlands, there is also the need for the agricultural sector to have a just transition into more diversified models of production, and horticulture was one of the areas there, and obviously forestry was the second area where that represented a massive potential. On CAP, yes, there is, to answer your question, as an opposition politician, I'm not negotiating CAP, so I can't tell you where the land lies. You could tell me more about that than I could tell you in relation to the negotiations that are ongoing. But one can assume that there will be a massive move towards the greening of agriculture, if you will, given the times we live in. And yes, absolutely, I think the committee was very supportive in a non-partisan way of ensuring that more and more of the CAP funding would be used for diversification and to assist farmers in that transition. And I think that's really the answer to your question.
Thank you. And we've representatives here as well from ICOS, if you want to.
Yes, Chairperson. Michael, President of ICOS. In welcoming this report, I want to compliment the Chairperson, Deputy Naughton, and the Joint Committee for the excellent work that has been done. And there's no doubt today isn't the beginning and the end of what we're going to hear in relation to climate change and climate action. This is going to be with us for a very long time. And I want to give the commitment on behalf of ICOS, the cooperative movement, that we will do whatever we can and whatever is necessary to assist people. And already, Chairperson, for the little that has gone out since this was brought into the public domain a couple of weeks ago, people have approached us already indicating that they are interested in looking at the formation of cooperatives for anaerobic digestion and other means. So we believe that is the road we have to go, and that's the road that we are prepared to help whoever wants to get involved. We will not be short on what we can do to assist. So I want to welcome this report. There's a hell of a lot in it. There was a lot of contributions and submissions. We made our own in early December, and I know some of the issues are included in it here, and I look forward to working with the state agencies, because there is going to be a lot of work having to be done in a short number of years, but we will do whatever is necessary to assist with that work.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to bring in Deputy Marcella Corcoran-Kennedy. I'm just taking as people indicated. That's okay. Marcella Corcoran-Kennedy was a member of the committee as well, and actually Tom Neville as well, Deputy Tom Neville, and Deputy Martin Heydon. Deputy Breach Smith is there as well, is on our committee, and you're on my list as well. So sorry. I'm sorry. Who? Sorry, excuse me. Deputy Mary Butler.
Catherine.
And yeah, Máire Devine. I said Máire Devine. Thank you.
Apologies for being late. We have another meeting. There's a little clashes here. I just want to say that I think it's really important that we have this document now, because Minister Ruth is going to bring his climate action plan forward in the coming weeks, and I think what's in this document is going to really inform that. And I want to commend you, Hildegarde, for your chairing of the committee, but also working so well with all of us to try and find solutions, because you know the message really is that this is a whole of government and a whole of society approach. And I think we just have to face the fact that we have changes to make, and it is going to be very, very difficult. And one of the key things to come out of the report for me is the just transition. I'm from Offaly. We're used to energy generation. We had one of the least amounts of migration in the 50s and 60s out of the county, because we imposed an ESB to employ our young men predominantly. It's in the DNA of us, energy generation in Offaly, and it's a massive, massive change for us. There are people who are really hurting over having to forget about Woodmore as a potential employer in the peat harvesting area, because there is something almost psychological in it. There's a tradition there that is going to be very, very hard for people to change it. And that is why the just transition to me is so crucial. That there's a just transition for the agriculture sector, that there's a just transition for people in the energy sector, that there's a just transition for people who are not in a position to maybe make those pay the extra taxes or whatever. So we have to ensure that we bring everybody along with this, because underlying all of this is the fact that this is the biggest challenge to civilization globally. As people will say, sure, we're only a small population, we're right. But if we want to remain an island and we don't want the sea levels to rise, we have to lead by example, I think. And we have to carry our voices farther than this island here to the bigger players to say, look, we are in danger of becoming a series of islands, not an island, if we don't take care of it. We're looking at maybe my grandchildren, if I ever have any, no longer living on one little island, but a series of islands. I think it's not something that we can stand over. It's not, I don't believe. And I think we have a huge advantage in terms of our diaspora, where we can influence people who are in areas where we've seen what's going on in America, where we can carry influence there, and I think we need to do that. One of the other points I just wanted to make is around communicating the message here. I have for long, and I said to the public, that RT and Mulherin did not step up, in my view, in the last number of years in terms of helping get accurate information out. I really feel strongly that we will do that. And if this committee did one thing, and if you were keeping an eye on what's going on in the broadcast media, you can see that there is definitely a shift there. And I welcome that, because we will never do this if we cannot have accurate information, and information that we can trust. And I think allowing time for climate deniers, that day, I think, is over. It is absolutely over, and we have to get on with this huge task that we have. And I must say that the willingness and the leadership shown by the agricultural community, the leadership, of course, shown by the Climate Advisory Council, there's leaders everywhere in our society, and it's pulling everybody together so that we can do this and depoliticise it. That's the main message for me.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Smith.
Thanks, Hildegarde, and thank you very much for the job you did over the last few months chairing the committee. I know that it was often difficult and touchy, but you did a great job, and it was a very interesting and very informative approach to climate action. I just want to say that there are minority views, and People Before Profit holds one of them, Sinn Féin also, and we voted against the report on the basis that it contained the carbon tax on ordinary people. But I do want to emphasise that we're not opposed to carbon tax, but we believe that that tax should be put on the biggest polluters, the fossil fuel industry and the giant global food corporations. But that wasn't dealt with, it was voted down. So I'm very disappointed about that, and I think that sends out a very bad signal to the young people who stood outside this building in their tens of thousands calling for system change, not climate change. They also came to the committee and they asked us to take a big leap forward rather than small baby steps. And even though I contributed to some of the amendments in this report, I do think these are baby steps rather than giant leaps that are required. And for that reason, I want to say that I hope that if this committee and all of the deputies and senators are serious about climate action, that they will now pass the bill that we have tried for the last year to get through the Dáil, which is about keeping fossil fuels in the ground, the absolute ultimate that needs to be done. Just a small comment on just transition. I launched a minority statement yesterday on this report, covering not just carbon tax but lots of other issues with which I am not happy with the outcome of the committee. But I had a SIP2 official there representing the Board of workers, and what he had to tell us about the lack of just transition for the workers in Bordemona would put the hair standing on the back of your neck. And I think the first thing this committee needs to do is to revisit that issue, because workers throughout Bordemona are being treated abysmally, they're his words, in terms of their access to their pension, their access to future work. It is not a good example of how this state intends to deal with just transition for either workers, farmers or communities. If they don't do the Bordemona workers right, because it is the first challenge, then how are they going to treat all other workers, the communities they come from, the farmers, the ESB workers? So I really am flagging that up as hugely important. I was shocked to hear the stories he told me yesterday. I don't represent Bordemona workers as in a local TD, but on a political sphere, I'm absolutely determined to raise this question of just transition. You get this one wrong and forget about the rest of your plans for just transition.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Marcella Horton-Kennedy.
Thank you. Just to address the point around Bordemona, Offaly, as I referred to earlier, is the county that is most affected by the plans that Bordemona are making. And Offaly County Council has again shown great leadership in pulling together a transition team, which they're working with Bordemona. They've attended all of the meetings. And what they've done in terms of the transition team, and I think it's a model that should be examined very carefully, they've brought all the players together. They've brought the Department of Social Protection, they have brought the Laois and Offaly Enterprise, or the Laois and Offaly ETB together. They have brought people who can advise them on third level education. And so I think that is the way to do it. From my understanding and from the information that I've received is that the redundancy scheme is oversubscribed. So more staff are applying for it than they expected. Now, clearly, all of them are not going to be in receipt of it because they will only allow people to benefit from the redundancy package. A lot of these are young people who are well capable to bring skills, to set up their own businesses, to work elsewhere, to transition, to upskill. Some of these people want to go to third level for the first time ever. They didn't maybe get an opportunity when they were younger. So to me, it's about seeing and realising the potential that's there and ensuring that there is truly a just transition for the workers and for the ordinary workers. That I don't often refer to ordinary workers, but I represent all workers, ordinary and excellent and exceptional, where we represent everybody when we are here in the houses of the Oireachtas. And I can assure you, Breed and anybody else that has any concerns about the people in Offaly or in the Midlands that are implicated by the decision of Bordemona, that they have a good champion in me representing ordinary workers as well.
And just in relation to the just transition, I'm not going to take up time because we have a list of people who want to speak here. We have in the plan, in our recommendations, that the existing structures that are in place, the regional enterprise plan, committees that are set up already in existence across the country would be that structure to, I suppose, identify key industries who will need those supports, and to identify the industries that are, I suppose, heavily reliant on fossil fuels, and to help those workers make that transition. And again, that's one of the key recommendations in this report. Again, another example of how we have worked collectively, and I think we were all in agreement about the protection of workers and working with education and training boards, and to, I suppose, to be able to plan in advance of this transition, to support the workers to make that transition to a low carbon economy. I'm going to bring in Justin Moore next to my list.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Just to welcome the report, as are Justin Moore and Irish Wind Energy Association. Just to welcome the report and the strong support outlined in it for the development of renewable energy, and in particular offshore. But I actually think the most important recommendations in it don't even deal with wind energy, I suppose, my area, and that's the point you made in the introduction about the policy framework about implementing this report. We've reports and strategies across every policy area in government that have never been implemented, that have no timelines, that have no budgets, that have nobody held accountable. And I think the robust monitoring and implementation process set out in this report is something that's the most important part of it, and hopefully will enable us to drive forward the recommendations in this and the National Energy and Climate Plan. And just to suggest that as well as the implementation board and the report that brings together the government departments, consideration could be given to a space to bring together other key stakeholders, maybe below department level. So I'm thinking of the system operators, the regulator, on board Plenala, industry, a place where we can come together to work on maybe the administrative and technical implementation of the plan, while the departments drive the policy implementation. I think that could be a way of helping to move this forward as quickly as we possibly can. And just to say thank you again for all of the work by the committee members.
Thank you very much. And I think I suppose the point and the area that probably had the least focus was the whole governance structure, and I think that it's the real transformational shift within this report, and it is going to ensure that this report and the Minister's all of government climate action plan doesn't sit on a shelf. It will have the oversight by our standing committee. We'll be able to act like a PAC for climate and bring in ministers, bring in officials who will have a clear timeframes, timelines and targets in relation to meeting our climate targets and reducing emissions, and there'll be greater transparency there. And I think we're all very focused. We spent the last 7 months knowing that this was the process. It's one of the first things that we looked at was the governance structure and how we're going to ensure that this plan becomes a reality, and that we can really ensure that as well the all of government plan is implemented and there's transparency and accountability around that. And the Climate Advisory Council will form obviously a key part of that with the 5-year carbon budgets. Next on my list here is Oisin Coughlin.
Thank you, Chair. Oisin Coughlin, Director of Friends of the Earth and Coordinator of the Stop Climate Chaos Coalition. So firstly, we, like others, would acknowledge the great work the committee did over the last few months, and we very much welcome the report. We regard it as a landmark, particularly for the cross-party consensus that underlies it, that we have so many parties agreeing to such a wide sweep of actions. With the committee itself, we would agree these actions are essential, but they're not sufficient, as you yourself acknowledged, to get us to our 2030 targets or beyond to Paris implementation. And so that gives you an ongoing job of work. Like others, and like you yourself said, they've actually kind of addressed my question now, which is that for us the key element of this is the governance structure that you've outlined, and I'd be interested in hearing from maybe other members of the committee how you see the role of the committee in ensuring that that actually gets put in place, given that there may be an election in the meantime, and how you see your role in ensuring that as the Minister develops his own plan, we go from his plan to the National Energy and Climate Plan to the National Mitigation Plan, to ensure that your work isn't lost but actually becomes institutionalised in the statutory framework of policy in Ireland.
Thank you. And next on my list is Deputy Eamon Ryan.
Thank you, Oisin, for your kind words, and thank you for the work that you and other environmentalists have done over the years on this issue, and our scientists here today, John Sweeney and others, just to recognise that. I think the governance structures will be implemented because that's the one thing we do know something about and we have control over. So I think all those structures I think are important. But I don't think we shouldn't be glossing this a bit. I'm just slightly nervous that this is all very easy now. No. What we found out in our committee, we got the modelling done, which hadn't been done, which showed that by 2030, on all the current existing plans, we'd only achieve a third of the emissions reductions we're committed to by 2030. That's maybe about a 10% reduction that it might achieve. What we've committed to here is 100% reduction by 2050. The scale of that leap is unprecedented, but we have to do it. The scientists are saying to us in the next decade is the critical decade to get ahead of this. We have to act now. The young students came in, Seán, you said it was true. Those young students came in our last meeting were so compelling because they were straight down the middle looking at us. You got to do it now. And the scale of change is immense. We have to change our entire agricultural system for the better. It's not serving farmers at the moment, so we give a chance to change it for the better, so they get paid properly and they look after our land. We have to change our entire transport system. Transport got a pass here, lads, in terms of emissions are rising, development sprawl model is continuing. That has to change. Energy is easier because the opportunity is so clear. But achieving a 70% electricity target by 2030, that's testing the edge of the envelope. That's showing real leadership. I think we can do it. But ultimately, I disagree slightly. I can't remember who said earlier on that we have to depoliticise it. I'm sorry, I don't agree. I think actually this is the big political question of our time. Because Breed is right, it is system change on a scale that is unprecedented, and the politics is the way to change systems. But I think we're starting now, I don't know which commentators or other reporters said, this gives us fair winds, this sends out a path for the next 15 years. I think it does, for the political configuration, to try and achieve consensus, to set up this standing committee consistently, to look at it, to have 5-year budgets. But I'll start by saying this. When this work was started, we had 2 objectives. One was to heed what the Citizens' Assembly was saying, but the second was to open up the process of devising this new National Energy Climate Action Plan, which in EU governance is the key plan, which is the new National Development Plan that sets out what we do in the next 10 years. I think what's worked very well politically for us, and this is the way the Oireachtas has worked, the way we brought in advisors, the way we brought in Maynooth, the way our Secretary Ted and your team worked. It was a really good, it was a proud example of Oireachtas working. We still have work to do between now and Christmas to agree what we're going to do in carbon pricing. I think, and you're right, we should look at what we do with our bogs as one of the big chunks that we could do to really store carbon. I think we need to look at transport, and I could go on. This work is not finished with this report. Even this committee's work, what the Oireachtas has agreed is we will continue working to the end of this year. We will keep our advisors and actually open up the process of devising the National Energy and Climate Action Plan, because that's the one that matters, that's the one that we have to influence and critically analyse, that's the one that counts. And our job is political. It is to raise the awkward and hard questions, working on a collaborative basis. But the leap we have, what those students said is we've got to make a leap. We know in this country that when we set ourselves on a common goal, we can make a leap. We did it in the late 50s when we went from a closed economy to an open economy. We now need to go from an unsustainable economic model to a sustainable one. It's a leap for the better. This report helps because we know how to work together to make it happen.
Deputy Tom Neville.
Thank you. Just to say, to welcome everybody here today. Obviously I sat on the committee and I went through a huge journey of education on this as well myself. I'll be from a rural agricultural constituency in County Limerick. I'd like to thank the Chair and all the members as well for all their time. We had some very robust debates and there was a lot of agreement as well over and back. What I would say, I agree with Deputy Ryan, it is a political system that would, politics will drive this, but we've just got to be very careful about playing politics with it, coming from our different backgrounds, and I think that's the key point here, and I think that's what we're trying to all avoid here, because it's such a sensitive issue, it's such a huge issue that we're now a generation of where we're at, and the future generations will hopefully reap the rewards of this, and we reap the rewards of this as a country. I think one of the huge important facts from me, one of the most important points here was communication. I was really paramount about communication and having everyone feeling involved in relation to this, to be allowed to air their views, particularly at grassroots level, at ground level, from the bottom up, a bottom-up approach. I'm talking about town hall type meetings, community organisations, that we can get into the nitty-gritty of the community to discuss this, so there's that cross-pollination of education between farmers, students, people from the business background, people from the public service, wherever it is, that meet in those situations, that this becomes discussed as a culture when they're out at a restaurant or whatever, that they start to understand this, because I think it's of huge significance to all of us, and I think that was one of the most important points that came out on it. So I look forward to working well with everybody, and just to thank everybody for coming.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Deputy Mary Butler.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to concur with what a lot of the speakers have said here today. There was a huge educational focus on the whole committee for us. And I suppose we learned straight away that we are going to miss by a very large margin our 2020 targets, and that the only way for us to reach our 2030 targets is for the government to take on board many of the recommendations here in our document. I suppose a spokesperson for other people's Fianna Fáil party, what struck me a lot was that we have 28% of people in this country living in fuel poverty. And I suppose the transition, say you take an older person living on their own and their only way to heat their house is the ballot coal and the baby bricks. How do we educate that older person to transition to a more carbon-friendly way of heating their home? So there's a huge body of work that has to be done. Also, I was struck by the fact that 80% of houses that are in this country were built prior to energy regulation coming into place. Now, we learned in the committee that 30,000 houses a year through the SEAI grants have some form of a shallow retrofit. But we did learn that most of the insulation, most of the grants were available for insulation and for pumping the walls with insulation, that the majority of people couldn't stretch to putting in the solar panels, or they couldn't stretch to the new heat pumping system. So that's something that the government will certainly have to look at, because whereas I know it all comes down to cost, an awful lot of people weren't in a position to avail of the grants because they couldn't meet the cost that went with the grant. One of the recommendations that I think is absolutely key from the committee as well, that the government will put a plan in place by Q3 of 2019 to meet the training and educational challenges of an enlarged workforce so that they will be able to deal with the retrofitting of houses. The committee aspires to that by 2022, that 45,000 houses a year will be retrofitted, and that we would hope to get to a trajectory eventually that 75,000 houses a year could be retrofitted. When we're talking about having 1.5 million houses that would have less, that wouldn't even have a bare rating of a bare B rating even. So there's an awful lot of work that has to be done. But I suppose that was the side of the committee that I really focused on, because we have to be cognizant that, you know, people say you can take the politics out of it, but at the same time we don't want to frighten people off, and we don't want people to feel that how are they going to heat their home if they can't buy a bag of smokeless fuel. So I have to say I certainly enjoyed being a member of the committee. I felt we did a lot of work. 95% of the time we were all in agreement of the way forward, and I sincerely hope the government will take on board what we have in this committee, because we were cognizant of the fact that so many people have a lot of challenges in their everyday life, that so many people do live in fuel poverty, and that one size doesn't fit all.
Thank you, Deputy Butler. And we have one more speaker before I go to Deputy Sherlock, and I think that's all our...
Jerry Loftus, the Irish Nature and Hill Farmers Association. I want to take this opportunity to thank you for the invitation here today, and to thank the committee for a really brilliant, comprehensive document on the way forward. And I want to particularly thank the chairman, person of the committee, Hildegarde Naughton, for an absolutely brilliant job done. We all are becoming aware, I suppose, of the seriousness of this issue, and if scientists are to be believed, and so on and so forth. And there's massive talk around change and so on. And I was watching a programme on Sky there Sunday morning where that if global warming is kept below 1.5, if it goes up anywhere near 2, the sea levels will rise by 6 feet. Now, that, as Deputy Corcoran Kennedy referred to, Ireland will be a part of Ireland and all that type of thing. My question to the committee, and while in the document it was absolutely brilliant to see a redirection on the forestry programme to more planting of broadleaves, which is absolutely necessary, and also a reference made to 500,000 acres of citrus spruce that's planted on the most valuable soil in the world, which is peatland. you know, and as Deputy Dooley said, the carrot approach will be required here, because the carbon-rich soils, the peatlands, all that type of farmland is now going to become critically important as regards carbon sequestration. Now, it will have to be taken care of. The people farming that will have to be taken care of. Information on it and so on and so forth. But when you look at our system today, in my view, we've already identified that 40% of the budget will be used on environmental and climate measures. But where is that 40% going to come from? Because I cannot see the sustainability of the system that we have in place. When we're going to pay farmers upwards of 60, probably 100,000 with the option of labour units after that, to produce food, let it be beef or dairy, to export out of the country. Now, the primary purpose of the Common Agricultural Policy is to produce cheap food to feed farm families of this member state. We're not doing that. We're using that money to provide profits for the likes of Glanbia of 55 million euros, profits for Arnua of 40 million euros, while rural Ireland dies a death. We had 374,000 farmers in this country in 1974. Today, we have 138. Now, if this decline continues on carbon-rich soils, on environmentally sensitive land, then there's no, there's going to be nobody there to do what is going to be asked of them in this massive fight against climate change. And as referring back to the 40%, my question is that the most money in the next Common Agricultural Policy has to be redirected to climate measures and environmental measures if we have any chance of doing what we're going to do. So my question to the committee is how do they justify paying up to 100,000, etc., to farmers to export food out of this country and at the same time creating a huge amount of emissions?
Thank you. I'm going to ask Deputy Martin Heydon to come in on that.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just on the broad point concur with my colleagues on the committee as to what a pleasure it's been in the journey I've travelled as a beef farmer from South Kildare, as well as chairman of the VideoParliament Parliamentary Party. I've probably came to the whole area of climate change with one viewpoint, and 7 months later I've seen those thoughts evolve, as all of us have, and we're all even more passionate now about the issue than we were. For me, if you take that our starting point was looking at the recommendations of the Citizens' Assembly, then what we have done as a committee I'm very happy with, because I wasn't happy with the element of the Citizens' Assembly recommendations around the area of agriculture. And I felt maybe due consideration wasn't given to the very positive role that agriculture can play. And that I think in our report, as some of my colleagues have mentioned earlier about the carrot and stick approach, that absolutely carrot needs to be provided as well as stick, and we can't have just one bogeyman. The day of saying there's one person there to blame and everything else can be fixed. We are all in this together, and we all have a role to play. And just as during the economic crisis in this country, if you look back at Michael Noonan's budget speeches of 2011, 12 and 13, agriculture probably played a bigger part than it has ever done in the history of the state, and definitely in recent times, because agriculture and tourism in those areas were looked to lift the country out of the economic mess it was in. Farmers didn't shirk from that challenge, and I've no doubt they won't shirk from the challenge that there is now in terms of climate action and climate change. The last cap was facing, if you remember, was facing a reduction of funding, and the reason we didn't see that reduction in the end was a proportion of money came from the environmental element and the environmental wing, and through measures like the beef data genomics scheme we were able to tap into that money. And I think as the next cap in the next MFF and next 7-year budget of the Commission is being put together, you'll see an even greater proportion of the money coming from the environmental side. So while it be given to agriculture, greater environmental measures will have to be there as well as a key part of that. But I think farmers is well up for that, and what we've done in our committee report is to say, of course things will change. Things are going to change even if we don't do anything, because the beef farming sector at the minute is under so much pressure, and so many different farmers in different sectors are looking at that. But there's a really positive role and contribution that agriculture can play, and I think you will see that in the measures, and obviously the cap is a key component of that in terms of the money, but also in terms of a whole range of areas. And I think it's telling here today we have people who from different organisations, agriculture and other, who generally wouldn't be necessarily in agreement, and they're all here today welcoming this report because they can see the different areas of it. We all agree the likes of anaerobic digestion in those areas are key areas where we can go in and tackle it. And back to the earlier point and the question that was raised about, I think Oisin asked about how we as a committee can make sure this just isn't another report that can just fall away and not be followed through. I think the key element to this is that what was a 7-month window set up for a committee, that committee remains and will remain into the future. And for me, the biggest element of this is the area of governance. The whole section around what we as politicians will do. So Minister Richard Bruton will produce a whole of government approach in the coming months, in the coming weeks. This report is fed into that, and what you will see is that we as a standing committee will act like a public accounts committee for climate action. We will hold every department to account. The day has gone now where when the cabinet sit around and they're discussing issues, that they don't just go from the Minister for Education to talk about education, and Minister for Climate, what do you do? Every minister sitting around the table has a responsibility for climate, and we as a committee will hold them to account for that, and we will drive through those recommendations on this. And after this Dáil, when the next 33rd Dáil is formed, that committee structure will still remain, our report will still remain, and the committee members on that will drive through those proposals. And I think that's the game changer in terms of governance for Seán.
Thank you, Deputy. And I'm told we have to get out of here very fast. I'm just going to take comments or questions. Kevin, do you want to say
Kevin O'Sullivan from the Irish Times. I think any reading of the report says it's a very substantial document, but two questions. When you say Eamon Transport got a pass, I know it was very concentrated work over 7 months. Did you not get around to considering transport fully? And secondly, a reading of the report clearly shows that there's regulatory blockages across so many sectors. And is there a risk, there's no clarity on guidelines for solar, for wind, offshore planning is in a mess, microgen is non-existent. Is there a risk that those blockages will impair the overall benefit that this report will bring?
And briefly, I'm going to ask Deputy Ryan and maybe Deputy Sherlock, who are eager to answer those questions.
I think we used a lot at the time we had to look at agriculture and land use, and I think that was right because it's been a really contentious issue, and it's always the first issue and it's the largest emission sector. And I think also maybe because there's less consensus on the need to change transport, I'll be honest. I don't think we've achieved that consensus yet, and I think we do need to now work and seek that, because the transport emissions are rising, and even if we switched every vehicle to electric vehicle, and even if we had hydrogen running every truck, the truth is that the transport system is broken in a similar way to I believe the current agricultural system is broken. It is leading to gridlock, it creates social divide, it's not efficient, it's leading to longer commutes. So we have other reasons as well as climate reasons for it to change. But yes, I think our focus was on agriculture, the focus was on carbon tax, which it always is. I think we started with some good aims on transport, but I'll be honest, I think we're only scratching the surface there. I think that's where the work needs to be done next.
Thank you. And Deputy Sherlock, briefly, and I might try and get everyone
The answer to your question is yes. There are a significant number of blockages. Like if, for instance, you don't unblock the foreshore licensing legislation, then that has a long-term impact on whether or not you can do more on the offshore wind sector side, for instance. So there's a massive job of work to be done here. And if you look at the framework that is planned, based on Oisin's question, if the government doesn't produce the legislation, the government of the day, let's be apolitical about this, doesn't produce the legislation in relation to the setting up of a Climate Action Council, and if the government of the day does not introduce a new culture around carbon budgeting, or if the government of the day decides to ignore the advice of the Climate Action Council, which is going to be on a statutory footing, well, all of this will be for naught. So there has to be a real urgent political response to the recommendations.
Senator Devine, I'm very sorry, but if you can just be very brief.
Yeah,
there's three others indicating.
I guess I'm Sinn Féin Senator, and the three of us, Sinn Féin members and Legal Before Profit, one member, were the kind of seen as the awkward members of the family, perhaps, in the carbon tax, and it was on the carbon tax alone. I will say well done to everybody on the committee, the chair and the secretary who supported us. I think we could talk about the climate tax and why we didn't go with it. Essentially, it's going to be harmful disproportionately to low income. But transport is really important. And for me, as a Dublin, a city woman, Bus Connects, 2 billion in Bus Connects, and yet they're still buying a fleet that is diesel, not electric vehicles, and that's over, say, 7-10 years. The National Children's Hospital, another 2 billion. Think what you like about that black hole, but that is
the new building regulations haven't kicked into that for when we're building infrastructure this big, for the emissions, for smart buildings, for absolutely, I suppose, technology to be employed in that. There's so much more to do, and I've enjoyed it, apart from the odd snarliness, but we
Very briefly, Alex, 20 seconds. Sorry, Senator Alice Higgins.
Senator Alice Higgins, I joined the committee as a substitute. I was there indeed for some of the debates on transport, and I think that question of public transport, a massive scaling up of ambition for it, and just transition and procurement policy are issues I think the Standing Committee is going to have to take forward. And just the multi-annual financial framework was mentioned. We are going to absolutely look at a shift in how CAP is done, so that it's environmentally focused, but also in terms of transport funding from the EU, that it is redirected more towards public transport. And I think that was a point of division at some points, but I think that it's not about necessarily seeking to push against other areas. It's about massively increasing the ambition on public transport, and there is funding that can be accessed for that.
Thank you. I'm very sorry for others wanted to make a contribution, but there's another group coming in and we're tight on time. So if members of the committee want to come out for a photo with the report outside, and thank you all for coming and for your input over the last couple of months. So we look forward to engaging with you.